The streets of Birmingham, England, packed today with fans who wanted to say their goodbyes to Ozzy Osbourne.
Ozzy Osbourne's funeral was one of the most talked about events of 2025. People from around the world tuned in to see how the Prince of Darkness, the legendary frontman of Black Sabbath, would be remembered. The world mourned, the media covered the big moments, and fans celebrated his incredible life and career. But what most people don't know is that many important moments happened away from the cameras, quiet, emotional scenes that told a deeper story. Behind the public tributes, there were private gestures, secret preparations, and moments so personal that they can change the way you think about Ozzy Osbourne forever. This was not just another rock star funeral filled with loud music and flashing lights. This was raw, heartfelt, and, in some moments, deeply shocking. From the way Ozzy planned his farewell to the small things his family did behind the scenes, there were many touching details that fans might have missed. So, let's take a closer look at what really happened during Ozzy Osbourne's final farewell, the parts that weren't shown on live TV but are just as important to remember. Ozzy Osbourne passed away peacefully on July 22, 2025, at the age of 76, in his home in Buckinghamshire, England. He was surrounded by his beloved wife Sharon and their children, just as he had hoped. For years, Ozzy had been dealing with serious health issues, including Parkinson's disease, spinal injuries, and other age-related complications. In 2020, he had bravely shared his Parkinson's diagnosis with the world, and by 2025, he was mostly confined to a wheelchair and needed full-time care. Despite his challenges, Ozzy remained strong in spirit. He spent his last few weeks in quiet reflection, meeting close friends one final time and saying goodbye in his own way. According to close family sources, there were no dramatic scenes, just peaceful moments of love and gratitude. His wife Sharon later shared that Ozzy had been at peace with his journey and had even smiled during his last days. Fans around the world were heartbroken, but his passing was gentle, exactly the way he had wanted it. The media first learned of his death a few hours later through a family statement. As the news spread, thousands of fans began to gather outside his home, bringing flowers, records, candles, and photos to show their love. What began as a quiet family goodbye quickly turned into a global moment of mourning and remembrance. Ozzy Osbourne had always been outspoken about what he wanted for his funeral. He didn't want a sad, boring service. He didn't want long, formal speeches or fake crying. In many interviews over the years, Ozzy made it clear that he wanted his funeral to feel more like a celebration than a goodbye. He even joked that if people cried too much, he'd come back to haunt them. According to Sharon and other family members, Ozzy had taken time before his death to help plan parts of his farewell. He picked out the songs he wanted played, some of his own biggest hits, plus music that had inspired him when he was young. He said no to a traditional church service and told his family to keep it real. He didn't want polished tributes or PR-friendly speeches. Instead, he wanted people to drink, laugh, and play Sabbath songs loud enough to shake the ground. His family followed his wishes closely, keeping things simple and honest. Even the private funeral held in the days after his death was kept low-key, with no photos or public details shared. That's exactly how Ozzy wanted it. He didn't need the spotlight in that final moment, he just wanted those closest to him to remember the good times, the music, and the chaos that made his life so legendary. On July 30, 2025, the city of Birmingham, where Ozzy was born, came to a complete stop. Thousands of fans lined the streets for a public funeral procession that had been secretly planned by his family. The procession started in Aston, the neighborhood where Ozzy grew up, and moved through key locations in the city that had meant something to him during his life. One of the most powerful stops was Broad Street, where a bench and plaque dedicated to Ozzy sits near the famous Black Sabbath bridge. People had been waiting for hours, and when the black hearse carrying Ozzy's casket appeared, the crowd broke into applause, cheers, and even singing. Some fans blasted Sabbath songs from speakers, while others cried quietly and held handmade signs. The entire mood matched Ozzy's wishes, emotional, but not too sad. It was a farewell full of music, laughter, and love. Police blocked the streets, and mounted officers led the way. The hearse moved slowly, giving fans a chance to throw flowers, notes, and personal items onto the road. One man even tossed a pair of old boots wrapped in plastic with a message that read, "You walked with us. Now rest." Another woman held up a vinyl record of Blizzard of Oz and cried silently. Near Villa Park, Ozzy's favorite football club, a brass band played a slow version of Iron Man as fans sang along. It wasn't a state funeral, but it felt just as powerful. It was messy, loud, and completely real, just like Ozzy himself. After the public procession ended, the Osbourne family had one final stop to make. They went to the Black Sabbath Bridge, one of the most iconic places in Birmingham, where Ozzy had been honored years earlier with a bench and plaque. This wasn't part of the public plan. It was a private moment just for the family. Sharon arrived first, dressed in all black with a pearl necklace and sunglasses. She held a bouquet of purple flowers, Ozzy's favorite color. Slowly and quietly, she approached the bench, placed the flowers down, and stood in silence. Even through her sunglasses, it was clear she was holding back tears. Then came their children, Jack, Kelly, Amy, and Lewis, each wearing small personal touches that honored Ozzy. Kelly wore purple-tinted glasses, a nod to her dad's famous style. Jack had a silver cross on his jacket. Amy wore a bat-shaped pin, and Lewis had a tie with small purple skulls. Each gesture was symbolic, thoughtful, and deeply emotional. Jack placed a folded note on the bench, rumored to be a letter to his father, and walked away without looking back. Kelly sat beside the flowers, touched the bench, and whispered something no one could hear. No one made a speech. No one took the spotlight. The family stood together in silence, then turned and left. It lasted only 10 minutes, but it was the most powerful moment of the day. While Ozzy Osbourne was known around the world, no city loved him like Birmingham did. This was where his story began, from a troubled childhood to becoming the godfather of heavy metal. So, it's no surprise that the city gave him one of the most emotional and unforgettable send-offs ever seen. Local officials supported every step of the tribute. They approved large screens showing footage from Ozzy's performances, and dimmed the streetlights to match the solemn mood. Sanitation workers were told not to remove flowers or candles from the sidewalks for 48 hours, giving fans time to say goodbye in their own way. Even though some people criticized vendors for selling Ozzy-themed shirts and posters, most fans didn't mind. For them, it was a chance to take home a memory. More than just a celebrity funeral, this was a cultural event, a community's final thank you to a man who had inspired generations. It was a reminder that Ozzy wasn't just a rock star. He was a symbol of rebellion, strength, and survival. And Birmingham made sure he was remembered that way. From chants that echoed through the streets to the soft singing near the bridge, every part of that day felt personal. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But it was real, and that's what made it beautiful. Ozzy Osbourne may be gone, but his voice, his attitude, and his music will never fade away. His final days were filled with love, his funeral was full of personality, and his fans showed up like family. From his last concert in Birmingham to the family's touching moment at the bridge, everything about his farewell was done in true Ozzy style. Loud, emotional, honest, and unforgettable. He didn't want fake tears or boring speeches. He wanted music, memories, and the kind of raw emotion that comes from a life truly lived. And that's exactly what he got. His funeral reminded the world not just of who he was, but why he mattered so much. In a time when most celebrity deaths feel distant and polished, Ozzy's goodbye felt human. He was a man who made mistakes, faced his demons, and still managed to leave a legacy of strength, creativity, and passion. The city of Birmingham will always carry his spirit. And so will the millions of fans who sang along, cried, and remembered the wild ride that was Ozzy Osbourne's life. In the end, this wasn't just the funeral of a rock legend, it was the celebration of a man who lived life on his own terms, all the way to the end. This funeral wasn't planned by PR teams or organized for show. It was guided by Ozzy's own wishes, a celebration, not a performance. And while the cameras captured some of the music and mourning, they missed the unspoken goodbyes, the tears behind sunglasses, and the deep respect shown by his family and fans. As we dig deeper into what truly happened that day, we find a different kind of farewell, one that wasn't loud in every way but was louder in love, honesty, and soul. Ozzy didn't want to be remembered for just the fame. He wanted to be remembered for the life he lived, the family he raised, and the fans he loved deeply. And that's exactly what happened, whether the cameras caught it or not. Ozzy Osbourne's health had been in decline for years, but his spirit remained fierce. Even as he faced multiple surgeries and the effects of Parkinson's disease, he stayed strong, leaning on his wife Sharon, who was always by his side. He spent his final months in his countryside home in Buckinghamshire, surrounded by peace, trees, and the people he loved most. Unlike many celebrities whose final days are filled with hospital visits and media frenzy, Ozzy chose quiet. His family kept the world at a distance so he could pass in comfort and dignity. According to close family members, Ozzy's final hours were calm. His children visited regularly, and his grandchildren brought laughter into the home. Despite his pain, he often smiled when hearing music or watching old performances. In the last few weeks of his life, he held private meetings with friends, some of whom had been by his side since his Black Sabbath days. There were tears, of course, but also laughter, memories of concerts, wild backstage moments, and hard-won wisdom from a man who had truly lived. When Ozzy finally passed on July 22, 2025, his death was peaceful, just as he had hoped. Sharon later shared in a short statement that Ozzy left us with love in his heart and music in his soul. The family didn't rush to announce his death to the world. Instead, they took time to process, grieve, and follow the instructions he had left behind. And when the announcement finally came, it didn't feel like just a headline, it felt like the end of an era. Ozzy Osbourne was never one for following rules, and he didn't start doing so in death either. Over the years, in interviews and family talks, he had made his funeral wishes very clear. He didn't want a stiff, boring ceremony with long eulogies or sad hymns. He wanted people to celebrate him. To remember the madness, the music, and the mischief. Ozzy once joked in an interview, "If anyone cries at my funeral, I'll come back and haunt them." That humor stayed with him even in his final instructions. He wanted fans to play Black Sabbath loud, drink their favorite beer, and talk about the crazy stuff, because that's how he wanted to be remembered. Sharon Osbourne, who had stood by him through every up and down, made sure these wishes were respected. According to family insiders, Ozzy handpicked the songs to be played at his funeral, classics like Crazy Train, Iron Man, and even songs from other bands he loved growing up. He didn't want anyone sugarcoating his story. "Tell it like it is," he had told Sharon. "The mistakes, the music, the madness, don't leave any of it out." He also requested that his funeral be simple, no church, no fancy speeches, and no religious pressure. For Ozzy, it wasn't about heaven or hell. It was about the life he lived here on earth. His funeral was planned as a celebration of life, not a mourning of death. And his family delivered. The music played. People smiled through tears. And even in death, Ozzy stayed true to who he was, a rebel, a rock star, and a man who never played by the rules. On the morning of July 30, 2025, the city of Birmingham turned into a sea of black shirts, signs, and guitar riffs. Streets were blocked, flags were lowered, and fans from across the UK gathered for one of the biggest funeral processions the city had ever seen. Ozzy Osbourne, Birmingham's most famous son, was coming home for the last time. The procession was carefully mapped out by his family, who worked with city officials to honor the places that had shaped Ozzy's life. The motorcade began in Aston, where Ozzy was born, and made its way through streets filled with fans. People stood shoulder to shoulder, some cheering, others crying, but all showing deep respect. Music echoed from every corner. Portable speakers blasted War Pigs and Paranoid while fans held handmade signs that said things like "Thank you, Ozzy," and "Long live the Prince of Darkness." Police kept traffic away, but they didn't stop the emotion. One fan threw a pair of worn boots into the street with a note that said, "You walked with us. Now it's time to rest." Near Villa Park, Ozzy's favorite football stadium, the city had set up a special platform. A brass band played Iron Man in slow tempo while fans sang the lyrics with soft voices. It wasn't a performance. It was a farewell song sung by people who had grown up with Ozzy's music. Some waved flags, others lit candles, even though it was daytime. And as the black hearse rolled by, many simply stood still, whispering goodbye. The family didn't walk with the procession. Instead, they followed from a distance in private vehicles. They wanted the city to mourn in its own way. That decision made the event feel even more powerful. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about home, community, and shared history. When the public procession ended, there was one last goodbye waiting for Ozzy's closest loved ones. At the end of the route stood the Black Sabbath Bridge, a landmark in Birmingham built to honor the band that started it all. Years ago, fans had raised money for a bench and plaque with Ozzy's name on it. The city later turned it into an official tribute site. For the Osbourne family, this was the place that meant the most. Sharon Osbourne was the first to arrive. Dressed in classic black with a single strand of pearls and dark sunglasses, she held a bouquet of purple flowers in one hand and walked slowly to the bench. She stood there, placed the flowers gently on the seat, and removed her glasses. Photographers, standing far away, noticed that her hands were shaking. She didn't speak. She didn't cry in public. But her silence spoke volumes. Her hand rested on the back of the bench for several long seconds before she turned away. Their children followed. Jack placed a folded piece of paper on the bench, a personal letter, insiders say, written just for his dad. He didn't read it out loud. He simply laid it down and stepped back. Kelly sat beside the flowers for a moment. She touched the bench softly and whispered something no one could hear. She wasn't acting for the cameras. She was grieving in the only way she knew how. Amy and Louis came next, each laying small personal items, symbols of their father's legacy. There were no speeches, no music, no crowds. Just quiet moments of love, memory, and heartbreak. The family stood together for nearly 10 minutes. Then, just before leaving, Sharon turned back one last time. That final glance, captured by one quiet camera from a distance, said everything. It wasn't just the end of a day. It was the end of an era. The world said goodbye to Ozzy Osbourne in a way that was both epic and intimate. Fans remembered his music, his madness, and his journey from the streets of Birmingham to the world stage. But more importantly, they remembered the man behind the legend. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, battled addiction, and sometimes shocked the world. But through it all, he stayed real. He loved hard, lived louder, and never faked who he was. His funeral reminded us of the power of music, not just to entertain, but to bring people together. From the fans in tears to the children leaving personal tokens at the bench, this wasn't just a goodbye. It was a reminder of everything Ozzy had given the world: courage, honesty, and a reason to keep rocking, no matter how hard life gets. In the years to come, fans will visit the Black Sabbath Bridge, play his records, and tell their kids about the day they said goodbye to a legend. And as long as someone plays Crazy Train or shouts "We love you, Ozzy," at a concert, his spirit will never really be gone.